The wind came first, cold and sharp across the ridge, carrying dust that stung Sparrow's eyes through the scope. 412 meters below, a man in a gray jacket paced outside a mud brick compound, rifle slung low, talking into a radio. She held her breath the way her father taught her when she was 12 years old, hunting snow leopards in the Hindu Kush, learning that patience was its own kind of weapon. In her ear, a voice she didn't trust yet. "Sparrow, this is Overwatch 6. Confirm you have eyes on target." She didn't answer right away. She never answered right away. It made the Americans nervous, and right now, on this mountain, in this cold, she needed them nervous. Nervous men double-checked everything. Nervous men kept their people alive. "Confirmed," she said finally, eyes on, holding. Commander Jake Mercer's voice came back tight, controlled, the voice of a man who had learned a long time ago that panic was contagious, and silence was a discipline you had to practice every single day. "Copy, hold position until my mark." If you're watching this and you've ever felt like someone judged you before they even knew your name, stay with this one until the end. And do me a favor, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. 3 weeks earlier, nobody on that mountain had wanted Sparrow anywhere near this mission. Her real name was Captain Marian Qureshi, Pakistan Army Special Services Group, and her file, the one that mattered, the one with the details that explained who she really was, had been sealed for 14 months. Sealed meant locked. Sealed meant nobody outside a very small circle in Rawalpindi could read what happened on the ridge above Kalat the night her spotter died. The Joint Task Force assembled for this hostage rescue. An American aid worker named Claire Donnelly and her 6-year-old son Theo had been taken by a breakaway faction holding territory along the border. All anyone knew was that the Pakistani sniper assigned to the mission had an incident in her past that nobody would explain. That kind of silence made people like Jake Mercer very uncomfortable, and for good reason. Mercer had lost a teammate 2 years before in Helmand, because a local asset turned out to be exactly what the file said he wasn't. He had stood over that teammate's body and promised himself he would never again put his people's lives in the hands of someone he couldn't fully verify. It wasn't prejudice. It wasn't ego. It was a debt he was still paying, one careful decision at a time, and Sparrow's seal file looked to him exactly like the kind of unknown that got good men killed. "I need full background or she's not on my mountain," he told the liaison officer on the first day, standing in a cold briefing tent with a laptop open in front of him showing nothing but redacted lines. "Commander, she's the best long-distance shooter in the regiment, maybe the country. I don't care if she's the best shooter on the planet. I care what happened on that ridge, and somebody decided I don't get to know." Sparrow heard about that conversation secondhand, the way you hear about most things people say about you behind a half-closed tent flap. She didn't argue it. She had stopped arguing about her file a long time ago because the truth sitting underneath that seal was not the truth anyone expected, and she had chosen deliberately to let the silence stand. What the file did not say was that on the ridge above Kalat, her spotter, a quiet, devoted sergeant named Seed Anwar, had died not because Marian froze, though that was the official line, but because a senior officer had given a fire order based on bad coordinates and refused afterward to put his own name on the mistake. Marian could have told the inquiry the truth. She had the radio logs, she had the timestamps. She also had Seed's wife and 2 daughters and a senior officer who made it very clear, in the gentle, terrible way these things get made clear, that the truth would cost the family their pension and her, eventually, everything else. So she signed the statement that said she hesitated. She let them write that she had frozen under fire, that the half-second before she finally fired the spotting shot had cost Seed his life. It wasn't entirely a lie. There had been a half-second. She remembered every fraction of it, the way the dust kicked up wrong, the way her finger had stayed still on the trigger guard for 1 heartbeat longer than training said it should, because some old fear in her had whispered, "Wait, wait, something is wrong here." And by the time she trusted that instinct, the round meant for her had already found Seed instead. She told herself on bad nights that the freeze was real even if the official reason for it wasn't. That was the thing nobody who mocked her file understood. The silence she carried wasn't innocence. It was guilt, wrapped around a smaller guilt, wrapped around a lie she'd chosen to protect 2 little girls who still thought their father died a hero, which in every way that mattered to Marian he had. The young recruit assigned to carry her gear and run security on this new mission was a quiet 18-year-old named Aslam, freshly out of training, eyes too earnest for the work he'd signed up for. On their second night at the forward post, while Sparrow field-stripped her rifle by lamplight, he watched her hands move with a familiarity that made him frown. "You hold it the same way my uncle used to," he said. "Lots of people hold a rifle the same way." No, he shook his head slowly. Not like this. He used to rest the stock against his collarbone before he checked the bolt, every single time, even when it was already clear. My mother used to tease him about it. Marion's hands stopped moving for exactly 1 second. What was your uncle's name? Seed Anwar. He died before I finished school. They said he was a spotter who died protecting his shooter on some mountain nobody will name. She didn't answer that night. She didn't sleep much either. The next morning, Commander Mercer walked the perimeter with his executive officer, a steady Texan named Briggs who had a habit of saying exactly what everyone else was thinking. You really not gonna clear her? I can't clear what I can't read. She's been on that scope for 6 hours a day for a week, sir. Hasn't said 10 words to anybody. Hasn't complained about the cold, the food, or the fact that half this team won't look her in the eye. That's not the same as trust, Briggs. No, Briggs agreed, but it's not nothing either. The compound holding Claire Donnelly and her son sat on a shelf of rock above a dry riverbed. 3 structures connected by a low wall. 6 confirmed fighters rotating watch, possibly more inside. Intelligence said the group's local commander, a hard, calculating man named Rahimullah, had grown up fighting in these same mountains and knew every line of sight a sniper might use, which meant the rescue would have almost no margin for a second attempt. If the first shot missed its window, if the assault team moved a beat too early or too late, Rahimullah's standing order to his men was simple and absolute: kill the hostages before they could be retaken. Mercer ran the brief twice, walking the team through angles, timing, fallback positions, because uncertainty was the one thing he refused to leave on the table if he could help it. When he reached the part of the plan that depended entirely on one long, impossible shot through a gap between 2 buildings, he looked, despite himself, towards Sparrow. You're confident in that window? Confident enough to take it? That's not the same as yes. No, she said, it isn't. It was the most honest answer he'd gotten from anyone in 2 weeks, and something in him, some small, stubborn part that still remembered what trust used to feel like before Hellman took it from him, noted that and filed it away without quite admitting why. The night of the operation came in with low cloud and a wind that kept shifting half a degree every few minutes, which on paper sounds like nothing and in practice means a sniper has to recalculate constantly, holding numbers in her head the way other people hold a heartbeat, automatic, unconscious, until it isn't. Sparrow lay on the ridge with Aslam beside her as spotter, his first real operation, his breathing too fast at first until she put a hand briefly on his wrist, not gentle exactly, just steady, the way you'd calm a young horse. Match my breathing, not the other way. He nodded and slowed down, and for a moment, in the dark with the wind moving the dry grass around them, she saw Seed's face so clearly in the boy's profile that her chest ached. Below, the assault element moved into position along the dry riverbed, 4 men in dark gear, Mercer himself walking point because he never sent anyone anywhere he wasn't willing to go first, whatever else you wanted to say about him. Sparrow Overwatch 6, confirmed target. Confirmed holding. The man in the gray jacket finished his circuit and stopped near the gap between the 2 buildings, exactly where the plan needed him not to be, exactly long enough to become a problem, his rifle now angled toward the section of wall the assault team would have to cross in less than 90 seconds. He's blocking the breach line, Aslam whispered. I see it. Should I call it in? Wait. The old fear came up in her then, unbidden, the same cold half-second from the ridge above Kalat, the same whisper that said something is wrong, wait, watch, don't trust the easy shot, and for one terrible heartbeat she didn't know if it was wisdom or the same flaw that had killed Seed wearing a different face. In her ear, Mercer's voice, low and urgent. Sparrow, that's our breach line, I need him gone or I need another 60 seconds, talk to me. She still didn't fire. The man in the gray jacket shifted his weight, turned half a step, and in that half step she finally saw what the weight had been protecting her from. A second fighter, previously invisible in the shadow of the wall, stood directly behind him, close enough that the first shot, if it had come a half-second sooner, would have sent both men diving for cover and screaming the alarm a full minute before the breach team was in position. 2 targets stacked, she said quietly. Taking lead first, you call the cross. Copy, take the shot. The round went out clean, found the lead man before the sound of it ever reached him, and as he dropped, the second fighter spun toward the noise exactly as Aslam had predicted he would, exposing himself for the half-second Sparrow needed. Second target down, she said, and for the first time in 14 months, the old fear in her chest loosened just slightly, just enough to breathe through. The breach went fast and brutal the way these things always do. 3 fighters down inside the first structure, shouting, a single grenade flash that lit the compound white for a heartbeat, and through all of it Sparrow held the long gun steady on the second building, where Claire Donnelly and her son were being held, watching for any silhouette that didn't move the way her own people moved. It was Briggs who found Rahimullah first in the doorway of the second structure, one arm wrapped around Theo Donnelly's shoulders, a pistol pressed to the side of the boy's head, screaming something in a dialect Briggs only half understood, the universal grammar of a desperate man making a desperate threat. Sparrow, I need eyes on the doorway now. She already had it. Through the scope, the angle was worse than anything she'd trained for in years. A 6-year-old child between her and a man who had nothing left to lose. No clean shot, no margin, just a sliver of exposed shoulder and the side of a face half hidden behind a frightened boy's head. Talk to me, Sparrow. No shot. He's going to kill the kid. I know, no shot. In her ear, Islam's voice barely above a whisper, not protocol, not procedure, just a boy in over his head asking the only question that mattered. What do we do? She thought of Seed, the half-second she hadn't trusted, the cost of trusting it too late. She thought of 2 little girls in Lahore who believed their father died protecting someone, and she understood with a clarity that felt almost peaceful that there are some debts you only get to pay once, and you have to choose in the space of a breath what you're willing to spend. Islam, I need you to call Mercer's team to draw fire left now on my mark, not before. That'll expose them. Yes, call it. He hesitated the way young soldiers hesitate when an order asks them to risk other men's lives for a single shot that might not even work, and in that hesitation she heard an echo of her own old fear and understood, finally, fully, that courage was never the absence of that fear. It was choosing anyway. Calling it, he said, and keyed the radio. Briggs and one other man broke cover hard to the left, drawing exactly the reaction a frightened man with a gun makes when something moves fast at the edge of his vision. A flinch, a half-turn, the muzzle drifting a fraction of an inch away from the boy's skull as Rahimullah's attention split for the smallest fragment of a second between the threat in front of him and the child beside him. It was enough. Sparrow fired once. Theo Donnelly hit the ground crying, alive, untouched, as his mother's scream from somewhere inside the second structure turned, in half a heartbeat, from terror into something closer to disbelief. Target down, Sparrow said, and her voice, for the first time all night, was not entirely steady. In the after-action quiet, with the compound secured and Claire Donnelly wrapped in a blanket holding her son so tightly the medics had to gently coax her arms open to check him over, Mercer climbed the ridge himself instead of sending Briggs, which was not something he usually did. He found Sparrow sitting with her rifle across her knees, her right hand wrapped in a field dressing that hadn't been there an hour earlier, the recoil of that last impossible angle shot having torn something in the tendon of her trigger finger that the medic on scene said, quietly, might never fully heal the way it should. He didn't say sorry, he didn't say anything about the file or the weeks of suspicion or Helmand or the promise he'd made himself standing over a dead friend 2 years before. He sat down beside her instead on the cold rock, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. That shot shouldn't have been possible, he said finally. It almost wasn't. Islam told Briggs you called the diversion knowing it might expose his life and mine both. It was the only way to get a window. You could have told me that on the radio, saved yourself the argument. You'd have argued anyway, you like arguing with uncertainty. Something that wasn't quite a smile moved across his face, brief, almost embarrassed. Yeah, I do. He looked down at the dressing on her hand. How bad is it? Bad enough. Bad enough for what? She didn't answer that one because the medic had already told her, gently, the way medics tell you things they know you don't want to hear, that the damage to the tendon meant her trigger finger would likely never again hold the kind of stillness this work demanded. 14 years of training, of patience taught on a mountainside by her father, of a discipline that had cost her a friend and a reputation and very nearly a hand, ending not in a court-martial or a quiet dismissal, but in one perfect shot that saved a 6-year-old boy and broke the one tool she'd built her whole identity around. Mercer didn't push for the answer. He had learned slowly, painfully, over 2 long weeks on this mountain that some silences deserved respect instead of suspicion, and he understood, looking at her now, that whatever was sealed in that file, it had cost her something he would probably never fully know, and that the not knowing, for once, didn't bother him the way it used to. He stood, brushed the dust from his knees, and before he turned to walk back down toward the compound, he raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute, the kind reserved for someone whose rank you don't need to confirm because you've already seen what they're capable of. She didn't return it right away. When she finally did, her wrapped hand trembling slightly with the movement, it wasn't pride she felt. It was something closer to relief, the particular ache of being seen finally for exactly who she actually was, even though the man saluting her still didn't know the real story behind the silence. And even though somewhere in Rawalpindi, the file that called her a coward who froze under fire remained exactly as sealed as it had been the day before. 3 months later, Marion sat in a quiet room at the regiment's medical wing, watching a physiotherapist guide her trigger finger through a slow, careful range of motion exercise. The kind of motion that used to be so automatic she never had to think about it, now requiring focus and patience she had once reserved only for 400-meter shots in heavy wind. Aslam visited twice a week, though nobody had assigned him to, bringing tea and small pieces of news from the unit, and once a photograph of Seed that his mother had finally agreed to share, a young sergeant laughing at something off camera, rifle resting against his collarbone exactly the way his nephew had described. "They're reviewing the old case," Aslam told her one afternoon, careful, the way people get careful around news that might hurt as much as help. Something about new radio logs surfacing during a records digitization project. Nobody's saying anything official yet. Marion looked at the photograph for a long moment. "It won't bring him back." "No, but it might mean people stop saying you froze." "I did freeze," she said quietly, "just not the way they wrote it." She never did find out, by the time this story was first told, whether the regiment would ever rewrite what happened on that ridge above Kalat, whether the truth she'd buried to protect a dead man's family would stay buried forever or finally surface in some quiet correction nobody, outside a small office in Rawalpindi, would ever read. Her trigger finger healed enough to hold a pistol steady enough to qualify again on lighter weapons, but the long rifle, the discipline that had defined her for 14 years, stayed in a case in her quarters, cleaned every week out of habit, fired never again. Whether that was a fair price for one boy's life and one mother's relief is not a question this story is going to answer for you. Some of you will think she paid too much. Some of you will think she finally paid a debt that had been sitting unpaid since the night Seed died. Either way, if the story stayed with you, if you found yourself holding your breath somewhere on that ridge alongside her, that's worth something too, and I'd genuinely love to know which moment hit you hardest, so leave it in the comments before you go. And if you want more stories like this one, you already know where the subscribe button is. I'll see you in the next one.